Get that disgusting, rusting, paint-peeling eyesore off my federally protected waterway right now. Inspector Marlene Kowalski stood square in the middle of my private dock, the one my grandfather poured the footings for in 1948 with a wheelbarrow and a stubborn mule named Roosevelt. She had one polished boot planted on the same plank that still carried Granddad's carved initials, waving a USDA clipboard like it was the Ten Commandments and she was Moses reincarnated. Behind her, two junior inspectors in matching khaki tried to disappear into their own collars while she photographed my 1953 Lyman runabout from every angle, flash-popping like she was documenting a crime scene instead of a 75-year-old wooden boat that had outlived 3 presidents and 2 of my marriages. This vessel, she declared, voice climbing toward dog whistle territory, constitutes an aesthetic violation of 7 CFR 123.7 subsection C. Visual harmony in navigable agricultural waters receiving federal conservation investment. It is a visual blight on the entire riparian corridor and an insult to every taxpayer dollar spent restoring this watershed. I set my enamel coffee mug down on the portside cleat. Same cleat Granddad had carved JC 1948 into with a pocket knife, and studied her the way you study a sudden thunderstorm that shows up on a cloudless July morning. Mid-40s, hair scraped back so tight it pulled the corners of her eyes upward. USDA windbreaker 2 sizes too big, but the badge polished until it could blind a man at 20 paces. This was a woman who believed the code of federal regulations had been handed down on stone tablets and that she alone had been chosen to interpret them. "Morning, Inspector," I said, calm as creek water in February. "You're standing on private property that predates your agency by a good bit." She didn't even glance at the deed post I was leaning against. "Irrelevant. Your farm enrolled in the Environmental Quality Incentives Program in 2019. That single signature makes every drop of water from your spring box to the mouth of this dock subject to federal visual standards. Your floating salvage yard is visible from the conservation easement we paid you to install. That makes it our business." The younger inspectors shifted their weight like boys waiting outside the principal's office. One of them, a kid who couldn't have been more than 25, started to say, "Ma'am, the dock permit on file is from..." She silenced him with a look that could have curdled milk straight from the cow. I smiled the slow, easy smile my daddy taught me for dealing with revenue agents, game wardens, and ex-wives who show up with new lawyers. "So the United States Department of Agriculture has decided my grandfather's boat is too ugly for a creek that was here before the Louisiana Purchase? We have decided," she corrected, snapping another dozen photographs, "that it fails to meet the aesthetic integrity required of waterways enhanced by federal conservation dollars. You have 14 calendar days to remove the vessel or bring it into compliance with NRCS visual guidelines. Failure will result in immediate termination of your EQIP contract, forfeiture of all past payments, and daily accruing fines." She thrust a thick notice of aesthetic noncompliance into my hand. Official USDA letterhead, seal embossed in gold foil, the whole production. Then she spun on her government-issue boots, marched back up my ramp, and climbed into a white Suburban that had more antennas than a radio tower. The juniors scurried after her like ducklings late for inspection. I stayed on the dock long after the dust settled. A pair of wood ducks whistled overhead. Somewhere down the bend a bass rolled, slapping the water with its tail the way Granddad used to say meant they were laughing at fishermen. I looked at the Lyman. Teak ribs gone silver with honest age, paint flaking in places, but the hull still true, the old Johnson still purring like a barn cat. She was beautiful the way weathered barn wood is beautiful, the way a woman who has raised 5 kids and buried 2 husbands is beautiful. My father's voice drifted across 50 years of mornings just like this one. "Son, when somebody shows up on your land waving a rulebook they didn't write and can't quote chapter and verse, you smile, you nod, and you start taking notes." I pulled my phone from my overalls pocket, opened a new note, titled the folder Marlene, Documentation Day 1, and began typing every syllable she had just spoken, every gesture, every made-up regulation number. Time-stamped at 6:47 a.m., added the license plate of the Suburban for good measure. If Inspector Marlene Kowalski wanted to declare bureaucratic jihad over a boat older than she was about to discover that some farmers read the Federal Register the way other folks read Louis L'Amour, for entertainment, for strategy, and for the pure pleasure of watching a city-educated enforcer learn that the corn has roots deeper than her authority. 3 days later, the certified letter arrived while I was on my knees replacing a rotted stringer on the lineman, sawdust in my beard and varnish on my fingers. Return address: USDA NRCS State Office, stamped urgent, aesthetic enforcement action in red that looked like it had been applied with anger. Inside were 5 pages of single-spaced bureaucratic poetry claiming my boat detracts materially from the conservation values protected by federal investment, and threatening to withhold every future cost-share payment, place a lien on my cattle, and initiate daily fines of $500 until the vessel was remediated or permanently removed from view. I carried the letter across the pasture to old Miss Hattie Jenkins, who still picks peaches with a basket on her hip at 87 and has fought more USDA battles than most generals have fought wars. She read it through glasses thick as Coke bottle bottoms, snorted once, and handed it back. "Girls drunk on power, she don't have a legal mouth to hold it in," Hattie said. "EQIP contracts cover soil health and water quality, not whether your boat would win a beauty contest at the county fair, but they'll try to scare you into folding. Seen it a dozen times." Next stop was the county extension office. Agent Luis Morales owed me after I pulled his pickup out of the creek last spring with my old Ford. He disappeared into the back and returned with a manila folder labeled Riparian Visual Standards Pilot Program. Confidential. Do not copy. He laid it on the counter like it was nitroglycerin. "Marlene's baby," he whispered. "Submitted in 2021. Died in committee in 2022. Never made it into the Federal Register. No legal force whatsoever. She's been writing citations on a proposal that's deader than disco." That night I sat on the dock with a Coleman lantern, the lineman rocking gently beside me, crickets loud as combine engines. I read every line of my 2019 EQIP contract under the yellow glow. Buried on page 17, in 8-point font, NRCS reserves the right to conduct periodic on-site evaluations of practice implementation. Nothing about boats. Nothing about aesthetics. Nothing about docks built when Harry Truman was president. I opened my laptop, created a spreadsheet titled Marlene versus Reality, and began filling columns. Column 1, her claims. Column 2, actual law or regulation. By midnight, column 2 was mostly empty space and the word none, repeated like a heartbeat. Over the next 10 days, I made the rounds. Tommy Grimes lost a wetland reserve payment because his barn was painted too red for the landscape. The Miller sisters got cited because their heritage breed hogs were visually inconsistent with modern agricultural imagery. Old Man Pritchard had been threatened over a 1930s windmill that Marlene declared anachronistic. Every story followed the same pattern. Vague threats, no written standard, assumption that farmers would rather comply than fight the entire United States government. I recorded every conversation on my phone, photographed every bogus citation, scanned every letter. By the end of the week, my case file was thick enough to choke a goat. Marlene thought she was hunting a helpless dirt farmer who would roll over when the federal government barked. What she had actually done was walk into a cotton field at harvest time wearing a white suit and carrying a lit match. 14 days after her first visit, Marlene returned at 7:30 a.m. sharp with a convoy that would have made a National Guard general jealous. 2 white USDA Suburbans with light bars, a GSA-contracted flatbed big enough to haul a combine, and a U.S. Fish and Wildlife boat launch truck for technical support. I was tightening the last screw on the lineman's freshly varnished transom, bright work gleaming for the first time in 20 years, when the parade rolled down my gravel lane kicking up dust like a tank column. Marlene stepped out in full dress uniform, khaki shirt with epaulettes, badge shining like a second sun, clipboard now augmented with a stainless steel measuring tape draped around her neck like some sort of bureaucratic stethoscope. "Mr. Caldwell," she announced loud enough for the cattle in the north pasture to hear, "your compliance period has expired. This vessel is hereby seized pursuant to 7 CFR 123.7 c for willful failure to maintain visual harmony in federally enhanced waters. Removal will commence immediately." The tow truck driver, Dale Earnhardt Jr., no relation but he wished, climbed down from his cab and read the work order. His eyebrows went so high they disappeared under his ball cap. "Ma'am," This here says, aesthetic violation. I tow repossessed tractors and abandoned vehicles. I don't tow boats off private docks because somebody thinks they're ugly. I need a court order or at least a county deputy before I hook anything. Marlene tapped her clipboard with authority. Federal authority supersedes local requirements in conservation matters. Dale scratched his chin. Lady, I tow for the state police, the sheriff, and 3 banks. Federal don't scare me if it ain't signed by a judge and blessed by Jesus. I leaned against a piling, sipping coffee from the same enamel mug. Morning again, Inspector. You sure you want to do this in front of half the county? Word travels fast on the co-op text chain. 20 trucks were already parked along my fence row, phones out. Marlene made the same mistake every petty tyrant makes when they feel the crowd turning. She doubled down and turned up the volume. The USDA has absolute discretion to remove any object that detracts from the conservation aesthetic of federally supported waterways. Boats, docks, barns, windmills. If we decide it harms the program's public image, it goes. That is our mandate and we will enforce it today. 20 phones captured every syllable in glorious 4K. Dale shrugged, climbed back into his cab, keyed the mic, and told his dispatcher he was 10 to 8. No tow, code 4. Crazy lady with clipboard. The flatbed rumbled away. The fish and wildlife truck followed. Marlene stood in the dust looking like a general whose army just deserted. That evening, I uploaded the videos to a new Facebook group titled Marlene's Ministry of Pretty Boats. Membership hit 800 by sunrise. Comments ranged from laughing emojis to offers of legal assistance from retired attorneys who hate bureaucracy more than they hate weeds. The state USDA director must have seen the videos, because 3 weeks later I received an invitation that read more like a subpoena. Formal administrative review of EQIP contract compliance. Appearance mandatory. Location: County Courthouse basement. Presiding: Dr. Rajesh Patel, NRCS State Conservationist. Marlene arrived with a Washington lawyer in a suit that cost more than my new hay baler, carrying a briefcase and a PowerPoint titled, Protecting the Conservation Brand Through Visual Integrity. I arrived with a banker's box, Miss Hattie riding shotgun for moral support, and half the county crammed into folding chairs behind me. Dr. Patel opened with the weary voice of a man who had been on conference calls with DC since 6 a.m. We are here to determine whether aesthetic standards justify termination of Mr. Caldwell's EQIP contract. The Washington lawyer launched into a 45-minute presentation complete with before and after slides of my linemen next to manicured corporate farms with boats that looked like they'd never seen water. He cited programmatic integrity, brand protection, and public perception of conservation investment. I waited my turn, then asked a single question. Dr. Patel, can you or counsel direct me to the specific regulation, chapter and verse, that defines visual harmony and authorizes seizure of private property for cosmetic reasons? The room went quieter than a church mouse with asthma. The lawyer flipped pages. Marlene turned the color of fresh-killed beef. I opened my banker's box and began dealing documents like a riverboat gambler. 1948 doc permit predating NRCS by decades. 2019 EQIP contract with 0 aesthetic clauses. Internal USDA emails admitting the visual standards pilot died in committee. Audio of Marlene claiming absolute discretion over anything she personally found unattractive. Then I turned her own logic back on her the way Granddad taught me to turn a bull slow, gentle, and straight into the gate he didn't see closing. Dr. Patel, I said, using Inspector Kowalski's published standard, anything that harms the image of conservation must be removed. Threats against family farms, attempted illegal seizures, and public tantrums surely harm the program's reputation far more than a 75-year-old wooden boat. By her own rule, should we not restrict individuals whose behavior damages public trust in USDA? You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. Dr. Patel closed the hearing with the calm finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. All enforcement actions against Mr. Caldwell are suspended effective immediately. The Visual Standards pilot program is formally dissolved. Inspector Kowalski is reassigned to desk duties pending further review. 6 weeks later, the official letter arrived in a thick envelope with the USDA seal. Findings. My dock is pre-existing infrastructure exempt from EQIP oversight. The Visual Standards Program never existed in law, and sweetest music I ever read. I am granted full authority to restrict access to my private dock for documented interference with agricultural operations or harassment of the landowner. I milled a cedar sign that would have made Granddad proud. Private dock, access by permit only. Violations enforced as criminal trespass. Community use welcome with respect. I printed laminated permits on the same cardstock we use for cattle ear tags. Miss Hattie got permit 001. Tommy Grimes 002. The Miller sisters 003 and 004. Even the new couple with the purple barn got permits. Rule was simple. Treat people decent, clean up your trash, no clipboard policing. Marlene tested the boundary exactly once, 6 months later. She showed up on a Thursday morning in jeans and a plain shirt, hair down for the first time I'd ever seen, carrying a folding chair and a spinning rod like peace offerings. "Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly, stopping at the yellow line I'd painted. "I may have overreached." I studied her the way you study a storm that finally broke and moved on. "You declared war on a boat older than you are because it didn't match your PowerPoint." She nodded at the water. "Mind if I fish? I'll follow whatever rules you set." I handed her permit number 113. No measuring tapes, no citations, just fish. 1 year later, the lineman sits proud at the end of my dock, varnish glowing under fresh coats applied by 4-H kids earning community service hours. The dock has become the county's favorite outdoor classroom. Kids learning to tie clinch knots, veterans healing with rods in hand, neighbors swapping lies about the one that got away. Property values along the creek are up 11%. Realtors list Caldwell Dock access as a featured amenity. Marlene fishes every Thursday now, quiet as sunrise, occasionally complimenting someone's new paint job on their John boat. Turns out beauty isn't about perfect varnish or federal approval. It's about who gets to decide what's ugly, and discovering, sometimes the hard way, that the only genuine eyesore was the person swinging the clipboard.